Assessments at university are basically the thing we do that establishes how well you understand what you're being taught or what you're learning. And we give you a mark for that. And those marks are collected together and they become, that's what your degree's based on. So if you get all 60s for your assessments, you'll get a 2-1. If you get all 70s or an average of 70, you'll get a first class degree anyway. So arguably, and this is something I probably don't say enough, try and think of assessments as an opportunity rather than an obstacle or something you have to get over. So you're sitting thinking, oh man, I've got to do this essay, I've got to do this report. If I don't pass at this, if I don't pass at that. But if you sit and think, right, here's my opportunity to show these people what I've learned within this module and how much I've read and what I understand. If you look at it as an opportunity to say, so if I put down a lot of stuff and it's all relevant, I should get a good mark. You shouldn't be worried about it. There shouldn't be an anxiety. It should be like, right, how can I do this the best way I can to get a good mark? It's my opportunity to do so. So try and think of them in that way. And therefore, if you're trying to demonstrate an understanding of a module, then you've got to understand what your module's trying to teach you. And that's where your learning outcomes come in, and we will discuss learning outcomes later on. And the other thing, because what learning outcomes do, along with the question, so you'll be given a question or a task, they help frame your assessment and say, this is what we want to know about. So you make sure everything you tell them is relevant, because if it's not relevant, you won't get marks for it. So understanding the question, we've got different types of questions we're going to look at, and we're also going to look at the elements within a question, which are task words, the topic, and the focus. Generally, when you look at the vast majority of university assessment questions, they have these three things in them. So if you spot them and work them out, then you'll know basically what it's asking you to do. And it's important to consider every word within a question. So sometimes there are words or little things that are added that actually make a difference to what you're being asked to do. And that's important to recognize those. And then that that once you understand the question, I argue that if you create more questions, you ask more questions, and then trying to answer those questions, that's how you answer. And that's how you write your essay, that's how you do your report. But we'll go through them. And that leads us into what I call the reading and planning cycle, which is you read a whole bunch, and then you do some planning, and then you look at your plan. And if your plan's not full, you go back to the reading and make sure you've got everything you need. So it's a cycle: reading, planning, reading, planning. So previously, if you were asked to do an assessment, say at school or at college, because of the learning environment you were in, as I said before, you were given all the information you needed. It was presented to you. This is it. This is all you need to read. This is all you need to know. Then we're going to test you on it. So can you give us it back? Can you understand that? And can I write it in your own words and give it back to us? That's what it used to be like. And for everything they could tick off and say, yeah, they've talked about this, they've talked about this, they've talked about this, you can get marks for it. Doesn't necessarily need to be in a brilliant order. It doesn't need to be, but there are certain facts you should know and you should give back. That's it. Now, at uni, there's two big differences, I'd say, from that, in that what you know about something goes deeper, much deeper, because you're going to be critical about something. You're not just going to know something, you're going to assess something. You're going to evaluate it. We're always looking for that critical evaluation within everything. So anything you do is going to have that critical element in it. That's just a given. You're never going to write anything that's not some kind of assessment or judgment. And secondly, the questions can be very specific. So you may have a question that does tend to take in all the module, or you may have a question that takes in only a part of the module. And if you talk about anything outside of what the question is asked for, although it might be relevant to the module, it's not going to attract you any marks. So and that takes me back to what I said before, that a good answer, good academic writing is always relevant to the question that you've been asked. Task words are the first thing to look at when you get an assessment question. And they're basically instructions. And depending on the task word, what you're asked to write or what you're asked to do can change because of that. Let's look at some examples. So this is just, the next two slides are just a certain group of task words up to the letter E alphabetically. So there, needless to say, there are lots. I would say there are a good 30 odd task words that it's possible that you could be used. A lot of task words do the same kind of thing. It's just a different word that does the same kind of thing. But some are quite different. And if you're not careful and you don't recognize the password, you might set off and do an essay that doesn't answer the question because you've not taken that into account. So for example, let's look at the difference between compare and analyze, right? So analyze, break an issue into its constituent parts, look in depth at each part using supporting arguments and evidence for and against, as well as how these interrelate to one another. Okay, so that's an analysis, as I said before, breaking something down into its parts and looking at each one and seeing what's going on there. Compare is identify the similarities and differences between two or more phenomena. Now that's different. So a comparison is different from an analysis. Okay, say if any of the shared similarities or differences are more important than others. Compare and contrast will often feature together in an essay question, although it's not actually needed. When people say compare and contrast, they don't actually need to say that because a comparison includes contrasting, because it's similarities and differences, but they like to put it in. Okay, so you see how they're different, right? Now, if we move on to the next page, for me, there are two, these two in red are the most common. Critically evaluate or critically discuss or something critically something. That is the most important or the most common task word you'll get. Now, if you look at critically evaluate, if you look at this explanation here, for me, this is like, it's more than a definition. It's like a checklist that if you've written an essay, if you look at this checklist, it will give you a very good idea of whether you've done it reasonably well or not. So if you've critically evaluated something, have you or did you give your verdict as to what extent a statement or findings within a piece of research are true, or to what extent you agree with them? That's the key thing. Give your verdict. Is it true? Do you agree with what the research says? And then it says, provide evidence taken from a wide range of sources which both agree and contradict an argument. So have you read widely, and do you have both sides of any argument or any debate there is? Come to a final conclusion. So did you make up your mind? Basing your decision on what you judge to be the most important factors, and justify how you have made your choice. So in the end of, it's not just that you say you've been asked to assess something, but at the end of it, you have to say, well, what do you think of it? What do you think of it based solely on the evidence you've brought in? So you read your own essay and say, have you made a case one way or the other? Have you come down on one side or the other? Now you can either say, I agree, or this essay agrees, or the evidence suggests that this is the case, or you disagree and you say, no, there's not enough evidence to say this is true or this is a fact, or you don't agree with it. Or you can say, well, it's pretty even. There's strong arguments on both sides and it's difficult to say whether you agree or not. These are the three valid kind of answers that you can give from any critical evaluation. And importantly, it says, justify how you've made your choice. So it's not just you say, aye, that's right. You go back into your essay and you pick out all the things that have persuaded you and relate to them as well. So this, for me, is really, really good if you've given a critical evaluation question. And to be honest, they're all shades of a critical evaluation question. And the reason I've picked out discuss is it says this is a written debate, where using your skill at reasoning, backed up with carefully selected evidence to make a case for and against an argument, or to point out the advantages and disadvantages of a given context. Remember to arrive at a conclusion. There's such a similarity between that one and this one. I would say they're almost interchangeable. Although one's kind of about, the discussion is more, you would expect that to be used in a debate about something rather than specific research. But academics will kind of interchange these. The important thing is look at both sides, bring out the evidence and make sure you come to a conclusion. You have to understand what each of these means, so you have to write the appropriate response. So yeah, if you don't realize that you're doing a comparison and then you do a critical evaluation, you're not going to do the question justice. If you do a critical evaluation and they've kind of asked for an analysis and you go about it as a comparison, then again, you're not going to pick up on that in your response beat. And it's not uncommon for me to get work where the task work has not been properly thought about, and then the answer that comes doesn't relate as well to the answer as it could be. So that's really important. Now, the other two words that can come in are comment and illustrate. That seems like a wee word, a small word, comment. Comment. It seems like such a ridiculously, and comment about it. Like you make some small statements or something. But it's not. It's really important because that's another subtle way of saying we want a critical evaluation. And it's usually paired up with something else. So sometimes you'll get a question that says, outline something or clarify something. And then it'll say, and comment. What it's saying is that, yes, you have to clarify, make something simpler so people can understand it. Or you analyze something, you break it down into those different bits. You analyze it just like you're supposed to. But then when it says comment, they're looking for you to then evaluate it. So then it becomes a critical evaluation. And some people don't quite pick up on the comment and they just do an analysis of something with no critique. So that's something to watch out for. Illustrate, specifically if they say illustrate your answers, to be honest, when they say illustrate, they actually say illustrate your answer with examples, which then becomes, it's critical that you put in examples. But sometimes they just put illustrate, and some people, they kind of go, yeah, okay, and illustrate your answer. Well, what does that, obviously it doesn't mean draw wee pictures. Because I tried that one year and that went down like a lead balloon. They're like, what are these wee? I said, well, you said illustrate. And they said, do you really want to get thrown out? So when you're asked to put in an example, basically that usually happens because you've got like a theoretical thing. If you're talking about safety in a car, you say that nowadays there's, technology is highly occurrent in cars. Then folk can be like, what? For example, seat belts, for example, airbags, for example, impact zones, crumple zones and stuff. So these are the examples of the concept of in-car safety, and they help clarify what you mean. In the types of things that you'll be writing, examples can really help us recognize that you understand, because when you bring in the right example to explain the right theoretical thing or a concept, we really know that you understand it, so we can give you marks for that. So in any piece of work, I wouldn't rule out doing examples just because they haven't asked for them explicitly, because they're really useful. My one key tip about examples: never use the example you got in the lecture. Never use a common example in a book. Try and find your own, because when you find your own and they recognize it not to be the typical one, they definitely know you understand. But if you just use the hackneyed, commonly used definition, I don't think it works as well, because it's a common association. So here's task words. So we're going to look at some task words, and the three most common, I think, and see what they look like. Now, don't worry that these questions are nothing about fashion branding. For me, it's just to kind of it allows you to see it at work, but it also means I don't need to write 8 different PowerPoints with relevant questions for every degree I do. That's what, although I think I'll have to do that for next year. But anyway, so the first one is compare and contrast. The 3 dimensions of power identified by Stephen Lukes in terms of their potential to influence political sphere. So basically the question in general is, what are the, and this is the shortcut I use when I see compare and contrast. I immediately go similarities and differences. That's what I'm looking for here. The similarities and differences in the 3 powers, dimensions of power. That's what I'm looking for, okay? So that's my shortcut. So that's really useful to have a shortcut when you're in an exam. So you're in an exam and you're under a time pressure, you look at compare and contrast, immediately in your head you say similarities and differences, and that lets it make sense to me. And I can fire on and I can do that question. For the next question, this is a very common kind of format when they give you a statement and then they say, to what extent do you agree with this statement? So the statement is the Gaelic revival was the most important factor in advancing separatist nationalism. To what extent do you agree with this statement? And for me, the shortcut for me is it true or not? To what is it, how true is it? How true is it? Is it an accurate statement or is it bollocks? That's all they're looking for. So you can, in your answer, you could bring in a whole bunch of stuff that says, yes, it is, that's true. And this is why. It's true because of this, this, and this. Or you can bring in evidence to say, well, it's partly true because of this, or it's partly not true because some other things happened or whatever. But that's the important thing is you've got to try and, is it true? You've got to establish how accurate it is, how true it is. And the last one is your classic, critically evaluate. So critically evaluate the direct and indirect effects of Donald Trump's executive order number 13769. So for me, my shortcut for that is give it a score out of 10. Give Donald Trump's executive order number 13769 a score out of 10. If you give it a high score, that means you think it's a good thing. And if it worked well. If you give it a score of 1 out of 10, then, it was rubbish. And you say, well, how can I give a score? Generally, when you read about something, you'll start to say, wait a minute, this looks as if it was a terrible thing. And it pretty much was. For anybody that's interested, Donald Trump's executive order, that executive order was when he turned around in 2019 and he banned people from about 7 or 8 countries coming just like that overnight, banned people coming to the US. And you're just like, can you actually do that? Anyway, yeah. So give it a score out of 10. So you'll look at something, you'll read about it, you say, gosh, this looks as if it was a really good thing. So you know that your essay is going to be positive about it because you would give it a high score. Or you look at this and think, oh my God, how did they get away with this? This should be illegal. In which case, it's going to be a fairly negative essay and it would give it a low score. But that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to give it a score out of 10 in words. Right, the topic of the sentence. The next thing to identify in a question is the topic, which is the kind of general thing that's been talked about. So let's look at these. And I think they're fairly obvious. So the topic in the first question are these 3 dimensions of power identified by Stephen Lukes. So that's the general thing that this question is based on. It's the topic, the general thing. Okay. For me, the Gaelic revival is the subject, the topic in the next one. And again, for the third one, it's fairly obvious that the topic, the general thing is it's Donald Trump's executive order 13769. So because they are the topics, you would have to explain those before you go into the critique, before you go into the comparison, before you go into any comparison or to what extent or giving it a score out of 10, you would actually need to lay out, these are the 3 dimensions. This is the Gaelic revival, and this is the executive order. Before you then move on to the focus of the question, and this, knowing the difference between the focus and the topic is really important because it suddenly shrinks down the scope of what is possible to be said. It creates this frame. But when you talk about the topic, when you talk about the topic, it's like quite big, but then you bring in the focus and suddenly what's going to be in your essay or your report becomes much smaller. There's something that makes it, and that's why I say when I say questions are specific at university, it's because there's this focus that you have to pay attention to. So the focus in the first question is, when you compare and contrast these three powers, it's in terms of their potential to influence the political sphere. That's all you're talking about. You're not comparing or contrasting with anything else. And what I mean by that is perhaps these three dimensions of power could influence the economy. These powers could influence social things. These powers could manifest themselves in business, but we're not looking at any of those. We've got a focus, it's the political sphere. So you can rule out so much and say, I've got something I've got to concentrate on. And if you miss that, you will start talking about and bringing in stuff that's not relevant under the focus. It might relate to the topic, but it does not relate to the focus. And then suddenly you're not being relevant, although you think you are, or you think that you might be. Right, okay, and the second one. So the Gaelic revival, the topic is, was it the most important factor in advancing separatist nationalism? So the important part here is separatist nationalism began to increase in Ireland at a certain point in time in 1910. And there was this phenomena, the Gaelic revival was going on, and some people said, well, that's what caused all the separatist nationalism. So in other words, we've got this to what extent do you agree with that? But you're only testing it as you agree or not that it's the most important factor in separatist nationalism, not something else. That's the focus. And then in the final one, you've been asked to critically evaluate Donald Trump's executive order, but only in terms of the direct and indirect effects it has. Okay, so how did it physically or politically affect things, indirectly or directly? So you could write a complete essay about Donald Trump's executive order in terms of its legality. You could write an essay about Donald Trump's executive orders, critically evaluate them in terms of ethics, in terms of certain things, but it's not, okay? It's those, you're doing it on those direct and indirect effects. So how did it affect the people traveling to the country? How did it affect the country's economics? How did it affect, you know what I mean? That's the effects, right? Okay, so let's look at the question you've been given for EBBP. And I've picked this out. Now this is actually from last year, so it might be slightly different. So you are expected to demonstrate progression through key concepts and contexts via reflection on your personal development from your learning journey through trimester A. So task words, there are two. So one is demonstrate progression. How well have you kind of understood what you've been taught? For me, that seems to be one. So, demonstrate progression. Also reflect. So that means self-evaluation. For me, reflection is or usually self-evaluation, because it says your personal development. And so that's the thing. So you've to tell us how well you're getting on with it and what you've learned, and also reflect on your personal development. So what have you learned and how's it helped you develop? That's what I'm seeing. The topic of the question is your learning journey. So they're saying that this module is a learning journey in trimester A. So that's the general topic. You're going through a learning journey. That's the topic. But the focus is the key contexts and concepts that have been taught and your personal development. These are the two things that you have to concentrate on. Although it doesn't say use examples explicitly, they are definitely looking for examples, and I'll point that out later. So here you can see I've managed to pick out the task words about what you have to do, the general topic, and the key things that you need to focus on to make it ultra relevant. And this is another bit of the question which also is also helpful. You're expected to take into account your reflective logs, work experience, university experience, self-evaluation, diagnostic tests, and any feedback you have received from appropriate others at university or at work to help evidence your reflective writing. So if we go back, your reflective writing will be on your personal development. Okay, so what they're saying is these are things that are going to be examples. So you will write things in your log saying, I learned about this about myself because I done a diagnostic test. So I done the Belbin test and I found out about myself, or I done a Honey and Mumford personality test, or I was doing a task and I was doing something and I learned I'm good at this or I'm not so good at that. So these are the examples you're going to, this is the way you're going to, this is the evidence you're going to bring in to help you do that. So it's not so much academic books you're going to read, but it's the evidence that you can produce from looking at yourself. That's the one thing that reflective writing has, that it kind of comes from you and how you understand yourself, so that you can't really get that from a book as much. But what you can do is you can say, I learned about this myself and I understand from a book, this is what it makes me, or this is what it is. I find I tend to do this, and all the academic people say that's a good thing. Or all the academic people say this is not a good thing. So the other thing is, now I said, what's the module trying to teach you in the learning outcomes? This adds to what the question tells you. Module learning outcome 1 says that, if you get through this module successfully, you will develop enterprising behaviors, attitudes, and skills that make you more employable. And you will do that by reflecting on areas of past and potential employment, career development, digital identity, and the observation of professional behaviors in real life settings. That first is almost the question written in a way that you've been given, isn't it? So they're telling you, what do you understand about show the learning behaviors that you could have learned and what you're supposed to have that make you more employable. And then reflect on it and tell us, right, okay. The other thing I highlighted was, professional transferable behaviours, attitudes and skills required to address both local and global social and economic challenges. So that was one that I thought is really useful to know. The type of graduates that society is looking for, or businesses are looking for now, it's these skills have to be able to do these things. So you keep in mind that the skills that you're trying to attain allow you to tackle social and economic challenges and problems. So keep that in mind. Just have that in the mind that when you're writing your report, am I showing them that these skills, these enterprising behaviours, another facet of them, another part of them is that they will help me address local and global social and economic challenges. So that's the thing, that the benefit of the skill. What does the skill allow you to do? And that's basically, arguably, that's why it's going to make you more employable. And then the final thing, again, that you've expanded an awareness of your strengths and capabilities, but also what you need to develop. So in other words, what are you good at? What do you need to develop? And all of this is about that you understand what all the skills are that you can have. And it may be that you by the end of this module, you say, I'm dead good at this, and I'm dead good at that, and I'm dead good at this. And you can show the evidence for it. And then you say, however, I'm not very good at this, and I need to work on this, and I need to get better in that. Basically, if you do that, if you can look at your work at the end on the reflective part and say, this is what I'm good at, this is the things I already kind of have, and these are the things I need to develop. And when I have all of that, I'm going to be this employable graduate. You've done the job. You've absolutely done the job. Right. Then it says, and again, it talks about the reflective logs here. Via the use of reflection on the ongoing experience of the module using a reflective log. So every time you go into a class, you'll be writing this log up. And that's you collecting the evidence. So you're looking to write in this log. You're saying, what do I write in this log? You're writing this log something along the lines of, I was dead good at this today. We'd done this thing, right? And I was dead good at it because I'd done this and that. And, you know, folk told me so or whatever. Or you just say, I done this class and it was like a fire in a skip. It didn't go well at all. But what I learned was about myself, I need to improve this and I need to improve that. That's what the log's for. The other really useful tip about a reflective log is you can't fill it in at the end of the module. You have to do it week by week. If you don't do it by week, but you won't remember. It's almost like after the class, get the log out if you can and do that. And even if it's possible, if you're in a seminar, have the log there, or make notes somewhere, notes for log. Oh, I was good at this. I wasn't good at that. It will stand you in such good stead because it will give you the evidence for what you're doing. So here, all I've done is there are lectures. Now you will go to all the lectures, and I just feel that those ones I've highlighted, you want to pay particular attention to because they're going to give you information and foundation for doing that assessment. So these are the ones that are probably more than will do that, but these are going to give you things. So you're looking for things that help you and tell you what it is you need to be. Have you got those skills? Have you got any of those skills? What skills do you need to develop? That's what the whole module is about. Okay, and all of these lectures will help you with that. Right, so we're in the home straight now, just a couple of slides left, if that's. So let's start to develop our plan. Oh, it's our plan, we're doing this together, yeah. Your plan maybe, by creating more questions. So here's the question you've been asked again. You are expected to demonstrate progression through the key concepts and contexts via reflection on your personal development from your learning journey over trimester A. So some of the first questions I asked myself are, what the hell are these key concepts and contexts? I need to know explicitly what all the things that I'm supposed to learn are. Sorry, key concepts and contexts are actually like working environments and things like that, more abstract things. What is it? What is a more employable person, perhaps? Then, of course, what are the skills and behaviours I'm supposed to have for the line of work I want to go into? So what is it I'm supposed to have? Because that allows yourself to measure up. So if you say, I understand from the classes and everything that I need these 6 skills and behaviours. So you have to look at yourself within connection with these 6 skills and behaviours and say, 3 of them I have to some reasonable degree. 1 of them I'm really good at, and the other 2 I really need to develop. But you've got to work what they are so that you can evaluate them. That's why you need to know. But then you can go, but you see how, and then it's like, where am I now as a business professional? Where do I need to be? And how do I get there? That's a kind of that question, that final question is, for me, is the whole thing in a nutshell. It's really good if you can simplify a question into your own language. And it's like, what have I got that means I'm already a business professional? What do I need to have? And how do I develop to get there? That's basically what this module is about. And if you concentrate on that, and you can read what you've written at the end, and you're saying, this is what I'm good at, this is what I need to develop, these are the things I've been taught, you've done it. So finally, I think, yeah, pretty much. So we've got this reading planning cycle. Now, reading is a huge part of well, it's usually a huge part. In this part, reading and reflecting. Reflecting is the kind of non-academic way of learning about things. So some of it's going to come from books, but some of it's just going to be you sitting there going, how did I get on in that class? How well did that go? And for me, one of the tips I can give you about reflective writing is you are looking for times in the module when you were emotional. And when you think about when you were emotional, that's probably the thing you need to reflect on. And I'll explain that briefly. When were you really happy in the module? When were you chuffed with yourself? When were you pleased, satisfied? Well, if any of those occasions, it's probably because you did something well or you did something right. So when you think about the times you were happy, why were you happy? I was happy because I was dead good at that game, or I found out I was this or whatever. So you can write, these are positives. And the other time is, when were you frustrated in the module? When were you angry in the module? When did you feel low? And that's possibly because you learned something about yourself you didn't necessarily like, or you felt is something you need to develop, or if something didn't go well and you understood why, because it was, you should have done something differently. So when you think about, sometimes the key to reflection is the emotion you're feeling at the time when you're trying to find out. Anyway, so once you've done your reflecting that, then you start to have your plan. But as you plan, you may think of things, or you may look at notes or whatever, and you say, you know, I need to go back to the reading and get some more info. So it's always going. It's not like you do all your reading and then you plan and then that's you. It's never be afraid to go back and read some more at any point, even if the thing's half written and you think, oh gosh, I need something for this, or I didn't realize of this, and you go back and you start reading. That's never a problem for me. Never a problem to go back and start reading some more and getting something else, because it's probably going to boost your reference list for one, because you'll have another source you can add in. But it's just really useful to make what you're writing as complex as it can be. And that's it. That's us done for today. Next week, we'll be looking at more detail at being critical. That's my expectation, that we'll be talking about being critical.